When you see YouTube video footages of a space station and you see white objects floating around, there are many explanations, and we still don't know. But one of the possibilities is the space junk or any kind of thing that is emitted from that the space station can be interpreted as some strange maneuvering lights, but we don't know the real answer. So whatever the case may be, we just can't go according to the video footages, because video footages may be anything.
Yeah, the Phoenix Lights case, it's still a mystery, and really it begs to a larger question: what is it going to take for the general public to wake up to the reality of this phenomenon? You have Phoenix, Arizona. You don't get much bigger than that as far as a major city. You have a UFO a mile wide. The only thing I think that maybe would have been better is if this thing flew over during broad daylight, and then it would have taken all questions off the paper. But Michael, any thoughts on that?
The only other thing I would add, David, is the fact that on the Phoenix Lights sighting, earlier in the night, it was sighted over Prescott, then came down and violated the prohibited airspace at Sky Harbor Airport, and then went all the way down to Tucson. That's something that flares just can't do. So.
And one of the cases I didn't have time to talk about, I mentioned in my book, it's a retired law enforcement officer, 35-year veteran, former Marine. The guy's as credible as they get. I mean, I know the man, I know his history, I know people that know him, and I've worked with him on some other UFO-related incidents back in 1978, where he was the city marshal in Missouri for this town that were having UFO sightings and cattle mutilations. And he described it the best in trying to convey size. Because you tell someone, I had a large object over my head, well, that doesn't tell you much. But the way he described it, he and some hunters were out in this area north of St. Louis in a very rural location. And the gentleman who I think just recently passed away, he owned the property. And they would go out there every fall season to go hunting. He said, we had kind of wrapped up for the night, and I've got recordings of the interviews with this gentleman. He said we had wrapped up, and he goes, we were on the edge of the forest, and he goes, there's a big clearing there. And he said, we all had our guns out on the table, we're firing up the grills, and we're getting ready to make dinner. And he goes, all of a sudden one of the guys says, look at that, what the heck is that? And he hears one of his other friends say, yeah, what was that? Or what is that? And so they all walk out to the clearing, and he said, we saw this huge, as he said, flying wing or wedge, kind of like Dr. Harley Rutledge in 1973. And he said it moved out over the clearing, and the way he conveyed it really talks to the size that we're talking about. He said, Dave, he goes, it was so big, he goes, you couldn't look at it. You had to look from left to right to see the whole thing. Now, I don't care how high this thing is, when you describe it in that context, that really conveys a sense of size.
Aurora is something that has reached mythical status. Maybe by 1994, it had already reached this incredible mythical status. It was originally a budget line item for B2 procurement funding. That's something that Ben Rich had talked about. But there is, in point of fact, a number of different versions. It's more referring to a family of hypersonic vehicles than just one type vehicle itself. There is a precursor to the 1989 case, something that flew about 12,000 miles from the coast of California to Hawaii. Very fast craft, a diamond-shaped craft. There's another craft that I showed up here which was termed the Elegant Lady, which was the mothership to the two-staged orbit space transportation system. But bottom line is, if anyone thinks that the SR-71, the predecessor to that aircraft was the A-12, as you know, flew in 1962, the SR-71 flew in 1964. If anyone thinks that that's really the fastest we have right now, that's just absurd. I mean, we've got the technology. I showed you the Pratt & Whitney technology demonstrator for the magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion system. Where are all these billions of dollars disappearing to? And it would really be a shame if the SR-71 is really the best we have at this time. So you can check that out. Jane's Defense Weekly, Aviation Week Space Technology has followed the legacy of the Aurora program, and we definitely have a bird out there. We have multiple birds. We definitely do. Well, I would say that we know that Carter had his own sighting. That's been filed in MUFON files. We know that Ronald Reagan had a sighting when he was governor of California with Nancy in an aircraft, and he told the pilot to go chase after it, so we know that for sure. And then we also know that at least 3 times during his presidency, Ronald Reagan had talked about, one time at the United Nations and another time at a summit with Gorbachev, how wouldn't it be great if we could all come together as a united coalition to counter a quote-unquote alien threat. We would forget all our differences and petty arguments, and we would come together to battle that threat. That's something that he had talked about at least twice during his presidency. So Nixon is also alleged to be very interested in the UFO phenomenon as well. David?
Not necessarily with an actual sighting, but Gerald Ford, I mentioned the Dexter, Michigan case from 1966. You know, he was the representative at the time for Michigan, and he was the one that really kind of put the fire, you know, to the feet of the authorities in investigating this. Don't discount this, what's going on here. So Gerald Ford had kind of an interest in that respect, going back to the 1966 wave. And then, of course, Truman is alluded to be tied to the MJ-12 group, MJ-12 documents. You see a lot of Truman signatures. That's an area that may be debatable among UFO researchers. But your question, I think, it's almost twofold. You know, we talk about presidential knowledge and presidential disclosure, then we talk about the UFO cover-up. My own personal opinion, and again, you know, we may differ, the speakers here, my own personal opinion is the presidents don't know squat about the UFO situation. If you talk to anybody that's in the military, high-ranking military, they're going to tell you, presidents come and go. We're here to stay. And so presidents, to a large extent, are not given access to those materials. And, you know, it may sound strange, but even the President of the United States, if you don't have a need to know, you don't need to know, and we're not going to tell you. Well, Carter and Clinton, President Clinton, when he took office, he asked his long-term friend 2 questions. He goes, I want to know 2 things. What's the truth about UFOs and who killed Kennedy? And he was never able to find any conclusive information, or at least he never came forward with any conclusive information. So I think presidents are like us. Our interest level may differ from individual to individual, but the military apparatus, the intelligence apparatus is such that presidents are not going to get access to that information. Just like previous presidents didn't even know about Area 51. Michael's been over to my home a number of times, and we've been going through files, and we wrestle with this all the time as researchers. And the one thing that I think we have to be careful of, whether it's UFO research or any other scientific endeavor, is not falling into a belief system. This is not about belief, and I know I speak for Michael and myself. We're about following the information. And I know Michael's research has been very diligent about following that history. And neither one of us, and again, Michael can slap me if I'm speaking erroneously on his behalf, we don't use the terms all or none, that all UFOs are military, no UFOs or triangular UFOs are military. It's a gray area, and that's really where the research comes into play. That's why I focus specifically, though, on the history. When I started seeing the history and the fact that unlike a lot of the technology that we have, man-made aviation technology, man-made aircraft, you see an evolution in technology. When you look at the history of these triangular UFOs and going through my research, they are eerily consistent decade after decade after decade. And, you know, that's all I got to say on that. But, you know, these are questions that we wrestle with as well.